2 peas, 1 pot. A short story. Captivating was the mood, as a scrawny figure of a man struck away at the glossy white and black keys of a grand piano. He sat beneath a brightly lit, glassy chandelier. At last, with his crooked pointy nose raised to the ceiling, and the last of the finger fiddling having been undertaken, the thin man briskly stood up to a roaring applause. Well done, old sport. A tall and chubby fellow had stood up to greet him but would instead garner an instantly festered look of frustration from the now pensive pianist. Bah! The scrawny pianist lamented. He brushed the congratulatory jotted arm aside and made off to his single seat, the corner of his living room. The gray-haired fellow loved his corner. He could best keep an eye on his nosy guests that way. The man simmered down, briefly stewing in vague and inaudible mumblings. It's the spill, Johnny, you spilled some wine on the carpet. A red-haired elderly woman pointed to the off-white carpet beside the towering clumsy giant's feet. Nah. You can barely even see it. Johnny squinted down, past his thick bushel of a beard to his toes, and then quickly back to the glass of sparkling white wine that he'd held. Gosh, I'm sorry, Pete, you know me, I'm a klutz, right, Sue? Johnny raised his hands in the air, almost spilling over more liquid, before slowly lowering his unreliable hands. The once brimming room now felt tiny, dim, and the air was as thick as lard. A state of awkwardness happily reigned. 4 folk now sat in silence, sipping their glasses and checking their watches. My, look at the time, John, remember you said that you were going to help my father with what he asked for. Yesterday? Awkwardly stuttering to the finish line, a young brunette stood up and stared Johnny Matthews down, her husband, 30 years her senior. Yes, well, looks like time does fly when you're having a good time, Johnny chuckled, nervously. He stroked his beard way too much in too short a time. Pete, what can I do to fix this? I know a good cleaning crew. They come in when you're not around. Johnny the giant motioned around at the immaculately kept abode. And, he continued, they could just spruce up the place for you. It's like Hotel Gorgeous when they get done with you that. But soon Johnny noted how large Pete's eyes had gotten at the mention of people in his home, during his absence. Instantly, rumbling some unintelligible nothings, Pete waved his bony hand, as though wishing to drop the conversation entirely. He bitterly grimaced, as he couldn't help but fixate on the barely visible blemish on the far end of the carpet. Well, then, looks like I'll be seeing you at work on Monday, yes? Great idea bringing the core marketing team together, Sue. Johnny last remarked. It was like watching an animal shed its skin. As all the levity and joy in the world had featured across the large man's rough face. Bye, Johnny. Let's do this again soon. Sue smiled, though ambiguously. The words out of her mouth had felt hard to say. How could she possibly send out invites to people who were certainly not willing to undergo the Pete experience a second time? Sure. Maybe my place next time? That phrase was an implicit jab from Johnny to Pete, who remained quietly seated in the corner of the room, ignoring the standing bodies who'd embraced each other in the middle of his living room. Pete was a hermit, who'd pestered his friend, a psychologist, to recommend that his company allow him to work remotely, from home. Although, friend would be pushing it too far, since extortion and blackmail are not things friends should do to get their way. Anyway, there was no way that Pete was venturing out into the filthy and brutishly hellish world for far too long. The thin older man, in the corner, grunted, looking away as Elena and Johnny walked out of the door. There, are you happy? The one time that our colleagues decide to pay you visit. And you blow it like you always do. Ah, why do I even bother? I'm the dumb one here, you know why? Sue had her hands firmly rested on her hips. Her lips vibrated menacingly as she spoke. The red-haired elder's teeth were firmly held together, locked by a force that no 20-year-old could have mustered. There was no reply to her question. Pete tried at all costs to avoid meeting her gaze. She stood right in front of him. At this point, the tantrum-prone elder couldn't even stand up and venture off to use his own washroom. I'm the little sister that keeps enabling you. Did I mess up? Is it too late? This is what I ask myself every day. In the grips of her melodramatic babble, Sue would prematurely conclude, bitterly sizing up her older brother, before stomping off and forcefully picking up her purse on her way out. And lock the bloody door. Pete was over the moon that he was finally going to be left to his own devices. The skinny elder briskly stood up, effortlessly, as though arthritis were some fable, the boogeyman. The door clicked, and without checking to see that Sue had locked it from the outside using her spare key, the rigid, scrawny figure would rush off to his garage to grab some cleaning supplies. Surely, he was bound to meet some disastrous end in the form of a heart attack, or stroke, were he left to stare at the awful and gut-wrenching stain on his thick carpet for much longer. Never again. The hoarse-sounding voice would reverberate from his garage. The clanging sounds of supplies, being picked up and shuffled around, echoed throughout the empty and uncluttered abode. Swiftly running to the scene of the accident, as the cleaning supplies, metal cans and tall plastic bottles with liquid death within them had been tightly clasped, close to his chest, like a sprinting wide receiver holding the football with both hands. But the moment that Pete's face crossed into the living room space, a cold chill ran down his spine. "Who are you?" Though his voice had failed him, shaky as it came, Pete had still managed to shout. A stranger stood in his living room. A black metal contraption, hidden behind the man's back, came into view, the barrel squarely pointed at the thin, bitter elder. "Ah, look man." Pete had started pleading. He eyed the brandished gun with a straight face. "Take anything you want. Shut up. How many people are in the house?" The unmasked, bald youth had barked. Yet, the invader had managed to keep his voice at a whisper. It's just me. Just me here, okay?" The nervous vessel of tears, snot and spit had gone on to emphatically decree. Pete's waterworks had taken the intruder aback, having come out of nowhere and almost seemingly on command. "Walk. We're checking out the place together." The boy, no older than 21, motioned with his gun for Pete to lead the way, back to the rest of the tiny bachelor pad. "Try anything funny and I'll murk you, you hear?" "I won't." Pete squealed. The older fellow didn't know what murked even meant, with the lingo changing every 5 minutes, but it didn't sound anywhere near as pleasant as a hug. Pete was darn sure not going to rush the young fellow into doing something rash. Pete quickly raised his arms and placed them behind the back of his head, as he rushed over to where the pistol had pointed for him to go. The elder's heart rattled violently against his ribcage, like some sort of motor that propelled him forward, though frightfully.